Aludra said. She uses the hands and the feet with remarkable ability, no? Do not glare at me so, Nana, she added, dusting her hands. I am not your enemy. Here, you must try these new fire sticks. Nynaeve took the wooden box from the dark-haired woman gingerly. It was a cube she could have held easily with one hand, but she used both. I thought you called them strikers. Maybe yes, maybe no. Fire sticks, it says what they are much better than strikers, yes? I have smoothed the little holes that hold the sticks, so they can no longer ignite on the wood. A good idea, no? And the heads, they are a new formulation. You will try them and tell me what you think? Yes, of course. Thank you. Nynaeve hurried on before the woman could press another box on her. She held the thing as if it might explode, which she was not certain it would not. Aludra had everyone trying out her strikers or fire sticks or whatever she would decide to call them next. They certainly would light a fire or a lamp. They could also burst into flame if the blue-gray heads rubbed against each other or anything else rough. For herself, she would stick with flint and steel, or a coal kept properly banked in a box of sand. Much safer. Julian caught her before she could set foot on the steps of the wagon she shared with Elaine, his gaze going straight to her swollen eye. She glared at him so hard that he stepped back and snatched that ridiculous conical cap from his head. I've been over the river, he said. There are 100 or so white cloaks in Samara, just watching and being watched as hard themselves by Gildanin soldiers. But I recognized one, the young fellow who was sitting across from the Light of Truth in Sienda. She smiled at him, and he took another hasty step back, eyeing her warily. Galad and Samara. That was all they needed. You always bring such wonderful news, Julian. We should have left you in Tanchico, or better, on the dock in Tyr. That was hardly fair. Better he told her of Galad than that she walked around a corner into the man. Thank you, Julian. At least we know to keep an eye out for him now. His nod was hardly a proper response to graciously offered thanks, and he hurried away, clapping his hat on, as if he expected her to hit him. Men had no manners. The interior of the wagon was far cleaner than it had been when Tom and Julian purchased it. The flaking paint had all been scraped off. The men had grumbled about doing that, and the cabinets and the tiny table that was fastened to the floor oiled until they shone. The small brick stove with its metal chimney was never used. The nights were warm enough, and if they began cooking in here, Tom and Julian would never take another turn. But it made a good place to keep their valuables, the purses and the jewelry boxes. The wash-leather pouch holding the seal, that she had stuffed in as far as it would go and had not touched since. Elaine, seated on one of the narrow beds, stuffed something under the blankets when Nynaeve climbed inside. But before she could ask what it was, Elaine exclaimed, Your eye! What happened to you? They needed to wash her hair in hen pepper again. Faint hints of gold were showing at the roots of those black tresses. It had to be done every few days. Sarandon hit me when I wasn't looking, Nynaeve muttered. The remembered taste of boiled catfern and powdered maven's leaf made her tongue curl. That was not why she had let Elaine go to the last meeting in Tel Ayran Riyadh too. She was not avoiding Egwene. It was just that she made most of the journeys into the world of dreams between meetings, and it was only fair to give Elaine her chances to go. That was it. Carefully, she put the box of fire sticks into one of the cabinets, next to two more. The one that had actually caught fire was long since discarded. She did not know why she was hiding the truth. Elaine had obviously not been outside the wagon, or she would know already. She and Julian were probably the only people in camp who did not know, now that Tom had surely revealed every disgusting detail to Luca. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the other bed and made herself meet Elaine's eyes. Something in the quiet of the other woman said she knew that more was coming. I asked Sarandon about Damani and Suldam. I am certain she knows more than she lets on. She paused for Elaine to voice doubts that she had asked rather than demanded, to say that the Shan woman had already told them all she knew, that she had not had much contact with Damani or Suldam. But
Hey,
Elaine
D-Man, how you
kept
doing?
silent, and Nynaeve realized
How was
that
your
she was
first day
only
at
hoping to
work today?
postpone the moment with an argument. She got quite heated about not knowing any more, so I shook her. You've really gone too far with her. She waggled her finger under my nose. Still, Elaine only watched her, those cool blue eyes barely blinking. It was all Nynaeve could do not to look away as she went on. She threw me, somehow, over her shoulder.
Oh, training?
I got up and
Nice.
slapped her, and she knocked me
At
down with
least
her
you get
fist.
paid for training.
That is how I got the eye. She might as well tell the rest. Elaine would hear soon enough. Better it came from her. She would rather have pulled out her tongue. I wasn't about to put up with that, certainly. We scuffled a little more. Not much of a scuffle on her part, for all that she had refused to quit. The bitterest truth was that Sarandon had only stopped flipping her about and tripping her in sneaky ways because it had been like manhandling a child. Nynaeve had had as much chance as that child. If only no one had been watching, so she could have channeled. She had certainly been angry enough. If only no one had been watching, period. She wished Sarandon had pounded her with her fists until she bled. Then Littell gave her a stick. You know how that woman wants to get back at me. There was certainly no need to say that Sarandon had been holding her head down over a wagon tongue at the time. No one had manhandled her like that since she threw a pitcher of water at Nisa Ayelin when she was 16. Anyway, Petra broke it up. Just in time, too. The huge man had taken the pair of them by the scruff of the neck like kittens. Sarandon apologized, and that was that. Petra had made the Shan woman apologize, true, but he had made Nynaeve do so as well, refusing to loose that gentle yet iron-hard grip on her neck until she did. She had hit him as hard as she could, right in the stomach, and he had not even blinked. Her hand felt as if it might swell, too. Nothing much to it, really. I suppose Littell will try to spread some story of her own making about it. That is the woman I ought to shake. I didn't hit her half hard enough. She felt better for telling the truth, but Elaine had doubt on her face that made her want to change the subject. What is that you're hiding? She reached over and pulled the blanket back, revealing the silvery length of the idam they had gotten from Sarandon. Why under the light do you want to look at that? And if you do, why hide it? It is a filthy thing, and I cannot understand how you can touch it. But if you want to, that is entirely up to you. Don't sound so prim, Elaine told her. A slow smile broke across her face, a flush of excitement. I think I could make one. Make one? Nynaeve lowered her voice, hoping no one came running to see who was killing whom, but she did not soften it any. Light, why? Make an open cesspit first, a midden heap. At least there's some decent use for those. I do not mean to actually make an idam. Elaine held herself erect, chin tilted in that cool way of hers. She sounded offended and icily calm. But it is a ter'angreal, and I have puzzled out how it works. I saw you attend at least one lecture on linking. The idam links the two women. That is why the suldam must be a woman who can channel too. She frowned slightly. It is a strange link, though. Different. Instead of two or more sharing, with one guiding, it is one taking full control, really. I think that is the reason a Damani cannot do anything the Suldam doesn't want her to. I don't really believe there is any need for the leash. The collar and bracelet would work as well without it, and in just the same ways. Work as well, Nynaeve said dryly. You've studied the matter a great deal for someone who has no intention of making one. The woman did not even have the grace to blush. What use would you put it to? I cannot say I would take it amiss if you put one around Elida's neck, but that doesn't make it any less disgust. Don't you understand? Elaine broke in, haughtiness all gone in excitement and fervor. She leaned forward to put a hand on Nynaeve's knee, and her eyes shone. She was so delighted with herself.
There we go.
It is a Ter Angrial, Nynaeve, and I think I can make one. She said each word slowly and deliberately, then laughed and rushed on. If I can make this one, I can make others. Maybe I can even make Angrial and Saangrial. No one in the tower has been able to do that in thousands of years. Straightening, she shivered and laid fingers across her mouth. I never really thought of making anything myself before. Not anything useful. I remember seeing a craftsman once, a man who had made some chairs for the palace. They were not gilded or elaborately carved. They were meant for the servants' hall, but I could see the pride in his eyes. Pride in what he had made, a thing well crafted. I would love to feel that, I think. Oh, if we only knew a fraction of what the Forsaken do. The knowledge of the Age of Legends inside their heads, and they use it to serve the shadow. Think what we could do with it. Think what we could make. She took a deep breath, dropping her hands in her lap, her enthusiasm barely diminished. Well, be that as it may, I'll wager I could puzzle out how Whitebridge was made, too. Buildings like spun glass but stronger than steel, and Quendilar and... Slow down, Nynaeve said. Whitebridge is 500 or 600 miles from here at least, and if you think you're going to go channeling at the seal, you can think again. Who knows what could happen? It stays in its pouch in the stove until we find somewhere safe for it. Elaine's eagerness was very odd. Nynaeve would not have minded a little of the Forsaken's knowledge herself, far from it. But if she wanted a chair, she paid a carpenter. She had never wanted to make anything aside from poultices and salves. When she was 12, her mother had stopped going through the motions of teaching her to sew after it became apparent that she did not care whether she sewed a straight seam, and could not be made to care. As for cooking, she thought she was a good cook, actually, but the point was that she knew what was significant. Healing was important. Any man could build a bridge, and leave him to it, was what she said. With you and your Idam, she went on, I nearly forgot to tell you. Julian saw Galad on the other side of the river. Blood and bloody ashes, Elaine muttered, and when Nynaeve raised her eyebrows, she added very firmly, I will not listen to a lecture on my language, Nynaeve. What are we going to do? As I see it, we can remain on this side of the river and have white cloaks looking us over, wondering why we left the menagerie, or we can cross the bridge and hope the Prophet doesn't spark a riot, and Galad doesn't denounce us, or we can try to buy a rowboat and flee downriver. Not very good choices. And Luca will want his 100 marks. Gold. She tried not to scowl, but that still rankled. You promised it to him, and I suppose it would not be honest to sneak away without paying him. She would have done it in a minute if there was anywhere to go. It certainly would not be, Elaine said, sounding shocked. But we do not have to worry about Galad, at least not as long as we stay close to the menagerie. Galad won't go near one. He thinks putting animals in cages is cruel. He doesn't mind hunting them, or eating them, only caging them. Nynaeve shook her head. The truth was that Elaine would have found some way to delay, if only for one day, had there been any way to leave. The woman really wanted to high-walk in front of people other than the rest of the performers, and she herself was probably going to have to let Tom throw knives at her again. I am not wearing that bloody dress, though. The first boat that comes large enough to take 4 people, she said. We are hiring it. Trade on the river can't have stopped altogether. It would help if we knew where we were going. The other woman's tone was much too gentle. We could simply head for Tyr, you know. We do not have to stay fixed to this just because you... She trailed off, but Nynaeve knew what she had been going to say. Just because she was stubborn. Just because she was so furious that she could not remember a simple name that she intended to remember it and go there if it killed her. Well, none of that was true. She intended to find these Aes Sedai who might just support Rand and bring them to him, not trail into Tyr like a pitiful refugee fleeing for safety. I will remember, she said in a level tone. It ended with bar. Or was it dar? Lar? Before you are tired of flaunting yourself high-walking, I will. I will not wear that dress. Chapter 34. A Silver Arrow. Elaine had the cooking that evening, which meant that none of the food was simple, despite the fact that they were eating on stools around a cook fire with crickets chirping in the surrounding woods, and now and again some night bird's thin, sad cry in the deepening darkness. The soup was served cold and jellied, with chopped green Ferris sprinkled on top. The light knew where she had found Ferris, or the tiny onions she put in with the peas. The beef was sliced nearly thin enough to see through, and wrapped around something made from carrots, sweet beans, chives, and goat cheese, and there was even a small honey cake for dessert. It was all tasty, though Elaine fretted that nothing was exactly the way it should be, as if she thought she could duplicate the cook's work in the royal palace in Camelin. Nynaeve was fairly sure the girl was not fishing for compliments. Elaine would always brush away compliments and tell you exactly what was not right. Tom and Julian grumbled about there being so little beef, but Nynaeve noticed that they not only ate every scrap, but looked disappointed when the last pea was gone. When she cooked, for some reason they always seemed to eat at one of the other wagons. When one of them made supper, it was always stew, or else meat and beans so full of dried peppers that your tongue blistered. They did not eat alone, of course. Luca saw to that, bringing his own stool and placing it right next to her, his red cloak spread to best effect, and his long legs stretched out so that his calves showed well above his turned-down boots. He was there almost every night. Oddly, the only nights he missed were when she cooked. It was interesting, really, having his eyes on her when a woman as pretty as Elaine was there, but he did have his motives. He sat altogether too close. Tonight she moved her stool 3 times, but he followed without missing a word or seeming to notice, and he alternated comparing her with various flowers, to the blossom's detriment, ignoring the black eye he could not miss without being blind, and musing over how beautiful she would be in that red dress, with compliments on her courage thrown in. Twice he slipped in suggestions that they take a stroll by moonlight, hints so veiled that she was not entirely sure that was what they were until she thought about it. That gown will frame your unfolding bravery to perfection, he murmured in her ear, yet not a quarter so well as you display yourself, for night-blooming Dara lilies would weep with envy to see you stroll beside the moonlit water, as I would do, and make myself a bard to sing your praises by this very moon. She blinked at him, working that out. Luca seemed to believe she was fluttering her lashes. She accidentally hit him in the ribs with her elbow before he could nibble her ear. At least, that seemed to be his intention, even if he was coughing now and claiming he had swallowed a cake crumb the wrong way. The man was certainly handsome. Stop that! And he did have a shapely calf. What are you doing, looking at his legs? But he must think her a brainless ninny. It was all in aid of his bloody show. She moved her stool again while he was trying to get his breath back. She could not move it far without making it clear that she was running from him, though she held her fork ready in case he followed again. Tom studied his plate as though more than a smear remained on the white glaze. Julian whistled tunelessly and nearly silently, peering into the dying fire with false intensity. Elaine looked at her and shook her head. "It was so pleasant of you to join us," Nynaeve said, and stood up. Luca stood when she did, a hopeful look in his eye along with the shine of the firelight. She set her plate atop the one in his hand. "Tom and Julian will be grateful for your help with the dishes, I am sure." Before his mouth finished falling open, she turned to Elaine. "It is late, and I expect we'll be moving across the river early." "Of course," Elaine murmured, with just the hint of a smile. And she put her plate atop Nynaeve's before following her into the wagon. Nynaeve wanted to hug her, until she said, "Really, you should not encourage him." Lamps mounted in wall brackets sprang alight. Nynaeve planted her fists on her hips. Encourage him? The only way I could encourage him less would be to stab him. Sniffing for emphasis, she frowned at the lamps. Next time, use one of Aludra's fire sticks. Strikers. You are going to forget one day and channel where you shouldn't, and then where will we be? Running for our lives with 100 white cloaks after us. Stubborn to a fault, the other woman refused to be diverted. I may be younger than you, but sometimes I think I know more of men than you ever will. For a man like Valem Luca, that coy little flight of yours tonight was only asking him to keep pursuing you. If you would snap his nose off the way you did the first day, he might give up. You don't tell him to stop. You do not even ask. You kept smiling at him, Nynaeve. What is the man supposed to think? You haven't smiled at anyone in days. I am trying to hold my temper, Nynaeve muttered. Everybody complained about her temper, and now that she was trying to control it, Elaine complained about that. It was not that she was fool enough to be taken in by his compliments. She certainly was not so big a fool as that. Elaine laughed at her, and she scowled. Oh, Nynaeve, you cannot hold the sun down at dawn. Leanie could have been thinking of you. With an effort, Nynaeve smoothed her face. She could, too, hold her temper. Didn't I just prove it out there? She held out her hand. Let me have the ring. He will want to cross the river early tomorrow, and I want at least some real sleep after I'm done. I thought I would go tonight. Concern touched Elaine's voice. Nynaeve, you've been entering Tel Run practically every night except the meetings with the queen. That bear intends to pick a bone with you, by the way. I had to tell them why you weren't there yet again, and she says you should not need rest however often you enter unless you're doing something wrong. Concern became firmness, and the younger woman planted her fists on her hips. I had to listen to a lecture that was meant for you, and it was not pleasant, with Egwene standing there nodding her head to every word. Now I really think that tonight I should... Please, Elaine. Nynaeve did not lower her outstretched hand. I have questions for Birgitta, and her answers might make me think of more. She did have, sort of. She could always think of questions for Birgitta. It had nothing to do with avoiding Egwene and the wise ones. If she visited Tel Run so often that Elaine always went to the meetings with Egwene, that was simply how it fell out. Elaine sighed, but fished the twisted stone ring from the neck of her dress. Ask her again, Nynaeve. It is very difficult facing Egwene. She saw Birgitta. She doesn't say anything, but she looks at me. It is worse when we meet again after the wise ones have gone. She could ask then, and she still doesn't, and that makes it far worse. She frowned as Nynaeve transferred the small ter'angreal to the leather cord around her own neck, with Lan's heavy ring and her great serpent. Why do you suppose none of the wise ones ever come with her, then? We don't learn very much in Elida's study, but you would think they would at least want to see the tower. Egwene doesn't even want to talk about it in front of them. If I seem to come close, she gives me such a look that you'd think she meant to hit me. I think they want to avoid the tower as much as possible. And wise they were indeed for that. If not for healing, she would avoid it, and Aes Sedai too. She was not becoming Aes Sedai. She was just hoping to learn more healing, and to help Rand, certainly. They are free women, Elaine. Even if the tower was not in the mess it is, would they really want Aes Sedai traipsing through the waste, scooping them up to carry back to Tar Valon? I suppose that is it. Elaine's tone said she could not understand it, though. She thought the tower wonderful, and could not see why any woman would want to evade Aes Sedai. Sealed to the White Tower forever, they said when they put that ring on your finger, and they meant it. Yet the fool girl did not see it as onerous at all. Elaine helped her undress, and she stretched out on her narrow bed in her shift, yawning. It had been a long day, and it was surprising how tiring standing still could be when someone unseen was hurling knives at you. Idle thoughts drifted through her head as she closed her eyes. Elaine had claimed she was practicing when she had acted the fool with Tom. Not that the fond father and favorite daughter they tried on now was much less foolish to watch. Maybe she could practice herself, just a bit, with Valen. Now that was foolish. Men's eyes might wander. Lan's had better not, but she knew how to be constant. She was simply not going to wear that dress. Far too much bosom. Vaguely she heard Elaine say, "Remember to ask her again." Sleep took her. She stood outside the wagon in the night. The moon was high, and drifting clouds cast shadows over the camp. Crickets chirruped, and the night birds called. The lions' eyes shone as they watched her from their cages. The white-faced bears were dark sleeping mounds behind the iron bars. The long picket line stood empty of horses. Clarine's dogs were not on their leashes beneath her and Petra's wagon, and the space where the Sredit stood in the waking world was bare. She had come to understand that only wild creatures had reflections here, but whatever the Shan-Chan woman claimed, it was hard to think that those huge gray animals had been
Give me 1
domesticated
second,
so
everyone.
long that they were no longer wild. Abruptly, she realized that she was wearing the dress, blazing red, far too snug around the hips for decency, and the square neck cut so low she thought she might pop out. She could not imagine any woman but Verlaine donning it. For Lan, she might, if they were alone. She had been thinking of Lan when she drifted off. I was, wasn't I? In any case, she was not about to let Brigitta see her in the thing. The woman claimed to be a soldier, and the more time Nynaeve spent with her, the more she realized that some of her attitudes and comments were as bad as any man's. Worse, a combination of Verlaine and a tavern brawler. The comments did not come out all the time, but they certainly did whenever Nynaeve allowed idle thoughts to put her in anything like this dress. She changed to good, stout Two Rivers wool, dark, with a plain shawl she did not need, her hair decently braided again, and opened her mouth to call Brigitta. "Why did you change?" the woman said, stepping out from the shadows to lean on her silver bow. Her intricate golden braid hung over her shoulder, and moonlight shone on her bow and arrows. "I remember wearing a gown that could have been twin to that once. It was only to attract attention so Gadol could sneak by. The guard's eyes bulged like frogs. But it was fun, especially when I wore it dancing with him later. He always hates dancing, but he was so intent on keeping any other man from getting close that he danced every dance." Brigitta laughed fondly. "I won 50 gold solids from him that night at Spin, because he stared so much he never looked at his tiles. Men are peculiar. It was not as if he had never seen me. That's as may be," Nynaeve cut in primly, wrapping the shawl firmly around her shoulders. Before she could ask her question, Brigitta said, "I have found her," and all thought of the question fled. "Where? Did she see you? Can you take me to her, without her seeing?" Fear fluttered in Nynaeve's belly. A fat lot Valen Luca would say about her courage if he could see her now, but she was sure it would turn to anger as soon as she saw Mogadine. "If you can bring me close—" She trailed off as Brigitta raised a hand. "I cannot think she saw me, or I doubt I would be here now." She was all seriousness now. Nynaeve found it much easier to be around her when she showed this side of being a soldier. "I can take you close for a moment, if you want to go, but she is not alone. At least, you will see. You must be silent, and you must take no action against Mogadine. There are other Forsaken. Perhaps you could destroy her, but can you destroy 5 of them?" The fluttering in Nynaeve's middle spread to her chest, and her knees. 5? She should ask what Brigitta had seen or heard, and let it go at that. Then she could return to her bed, and... But Brigitta was looking at her. Not questioning her courage, only looking, ready to do this thing if she said. "I will be silent, and I won't even think of channeling. Not with 5 Forsaken together. Not that she could have channeled a spark at that moment." She stiffened her knees to keep them from knocking. "Whenever you are ready." Brigitta hefted her bow and put a hand on Nynaeve's arm, and Nynaeve's breath caught in her throat. They were standing on nothing, infinite blackness all around, no way to tell up from down, and in every direction a fall that would last forever. Head spinning, she made herself look where Brigitta pointed. Below them, Mogadine also stood on darkness, garbed nearly as black as what surrounded her, bent and listening intently. And as far below her, 4 huge high-backed chairs, each different, sat on an expanse of glistening white-tiled floor, floating in the blackness. Strangely, Nynaeve could hear what those in the chairs said as well as if she had been among them. "Never been a coward," a plumply pretty, sun-haired woman was saying. "So why begin?" Seemingly attired in silver-gray mist and sparkling gems, she lounged in a chair of ivory worked so it appeared made of naked acrobats. 4 carved men held it aloft, and her arms rested along the backs of kneeling women. 2 men and 2 women held a white silk cushion behind her head, while above more were contorted into shapes Nynaeve did not believe a human body could attain. She blushed when she realized that some were performing more than acrobatic tricks. A compact man of middling height with a livid scar across his face and a square golden beard leaned forward angrily. His chair was heavy wood, carved with columns of armored men and horses, a steel gauntleted fist clasping lightning at the back's peak. His red coat made up for the lack of gilding on the chair, for golden scrollwork rolled across his shoulders and down his arms. "No one names me coward," he said harshly. "But if we continue as we are, he will come straight for my throat." "That has been the plan from the beginning," said a woman's melodious voice. Nynaeve could not see the speaker, hidden behind the towering back of a chair that seemed all snow-white stone and silver. The second man was large and darkly handsome, with white wings streaking his temples. He toyed with an ornate golden goblet, leaning back in a throne. That was the only possible word for the gem-encrusted thing. A mere hint of gold showed here and there, but Nynaeve would not have doubted that it was solid gold beneath all those glittering rubies and emeralds and moonstones. It had an air of weight, quite apart from its massive size. "We will concentrate on you," the big man said in a deep voice. "If need be, one close to him will die, plainly at your order. He will come for you. And while he is fixed on you alone, the 3 of us linked will take him. What has changed to alter any of that?" "Nothing has changed," the scarred man growled. "Least of all my trust for you. I will be part of the link or it ends now." The golden-haired woman threw back her head and laughed. "Poor man," she said mockingly, waving a beringed hand at him. "Do you think he would not notice that you were linked? He has a teacher, remember? A poor one, but not a complete fool. Next he will ask to include enough of those Black Ajah children to take the circle beyond 13, so you or Ravine must have control." "If Ravine trusts us enough to link when he must allow one of us to guide," the melodious voice said, "you can display an equal trust." The big man looked into his goblet, and the mist-clad woman smiled faintly. "If you cannot trust us not to turn on you," the unseen woman continued, "then trust that we will be watching each other too closely to turn. You agreed to all of this, Samael. Why do you begin to quibble now?" Nynaeve gave a start as Brigitta touched her arm, and they were back among the wagons with the moon shining through the clouds. It seemed almost normal compared to where they had been. "Why," Nynaeve began, and had to swallow. "Why did you bring us away?" Her heart leaped into her throat. Did Mogadine see us? She'd been so intent on the other Forsaken, on the mingled strangeness and commonplaceness of them, that she had forgotten to keep an eye on Mogadine. She heaved a fervent sigh when Brigitta shook her head. I never took my gaze from her for more than a moment, and she never moved a muscle. But I do not like being so exposed. If she had looked up, or one of the others. Nynaeve wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and still shivered. Ravine and Samael. She wished she did not sound hoarse. Did you recognize the others? Of course Brigitta had. It was a foolish way to phrase it, but she was shaken. Lanfear was the one hidden by her chair. The other was Grandal. Do not think her a fool because she lolls in a chair that would make a Senjave no-room keeper blush. She is devious, and she uses her pets in rites to cause the roughest soldier I ever knew to swear celibacy. Grandal is devious, Mokadine's voice said, but not devious enough. Brigitta whirled, silver bow coming up, silver arrow almost flying to knock, and abruptly hurtled 30 paces through the moonlight to crash against Nynaeve's wagon so hard that she bounced back 5 and lay in a crumpled heap. Desperately, Nynaeve reached for Saidar. Fear streaked through her anger, but there was anger enough, and it ran into an invisible wall between her and the warm glow of the true source. She almost howled. Something seized her feet, jerking them backward and up off the ground. Her hands flew up and back until wrists met ankles above her head. Her clothes became powder that slid from her skin, and her braid dragged her head back until the braid rested on her bottom. Frantic, she tried to step out of the dream. Nothing happened. She hung doubled in mid-air like some netted creature, every muscle strained to its limit. Tremors ran through her. Her fingers twitched feebly, brushing her feet. She thought if she tried to move anything else, her back would break. Strangely, her fear was gone, now that it was too late. She was certain that she could have been quick enough, if not for the terror that had laced through her when she needed to act. All she wanted was a chance to put her hands around Mogadine's throat. Much good that does now. Every breath came in strained panting. Mogadine moved to where Nynaeve could see her, between the quivering triangle of her arms. The glow of Saidar surrounded the woman mockingly. A detail from Grandal's chair, the Forsaken said. Her dress was mist like Grandal's, sliding from black fog to nearly transparent, and back to gleaming silver. The fabric changed almost constantly. Nynaeve had seen her wear it before in Tanchico. Not something I would have thought of on my own, but Grandal can be edifying. Nynaeve glared at her, but Mogadine did not appear to notice. I can hardly believe that you actually came hunting me. Did you really believe that because once you were lucky enough to catch me off guard, you might be my equal? The woman's laugh was cutting. If you only knew the effort I have put into finding you, and you came to me. She glanced around at the wagons, studying the lions and bears for a moment before turning back to Nynaeve. A menagerie. That would make you easy enough to find, if I needed to, now. Do your worst, burn you, snarled, as best she could. Doubled up as she was, she had to force the words out one by one. She did not dare look straight toward Brigitta, not that she could have shifted her head enough to, but rolling her eyes as if caught between fury and fear, she caught a glimpse. Her stomach went hollow, even stretched tight as a sheepskin for drying. Brigitta lay sprawled on the ground, silver arrows spilling from the quiver at her waist, her silver bow a span from her unmoving hand. Lucky, you say? If you hadn't managed to sneak up on me, I'd have striped you till you wailed. I'd have wrung your neck like a chicken. She had only one chance, if Brigitta was dead, and a bleak one, to make Mogadine so angry that she killed her quickly in a rage. If only there was some way to warn Elaine. Her dying would have to do it. Remember how you said you'd use me for a mounting block? And later when I said I'd do the same for you? That was after I had beaten you. When you were whimpering and pleading for your life, offering me anything. You are a gutless coward. The leavings from a nightjar. You piece of... Something thick crawled into her mouth, flattening her tongue and forcing her jaws wide. You are so simple, Mogadine murmured. Believe me, I am quite angry enough with you already. I do not think I will use you for a mounting block. Her smile made Nynaeve's skin crawl. I think I will turn you into a horse. It is quite possible here. A horse, a mouse, a frog. She paused, listening. A cricket. And every time you come to tell Iranriod, you'll be a horse until I change it. Or some other with the knowledge does so. She paused again, looking almost sympathetic. No, I'd not want to give you false hope. There are only 9 of us now who know that binding, and you would not want any of the others to have you any more than myself. You will be a horse every time I bring you here. You will have your own saddle and bridle. I will even braid your mane. Nynaeve's braid jerked almost out of her scalp. You will remember who you are even then, of course. I think I will enjoy our rides, though you may not. Mogadine took a deep breath, and her dress darkened to something that glistened in the pale light. Nynaeve could not be sure, but she thought it might be the color of wet blood. You make me approach Semirag. It will be well to be done with you, so I can turn my full attention to matters of importance. Is the little yellow-haired chit with you in this menagerie? The thickness vanished from Nynaeve's mouth. I'm alone, you stupid pain. As if she had been beaten from ankles to shoulders, every stroke landing at once. She bellowed shrilly. Again. She tried to clamp her teeth shut, but her own endless shriek filled her ears. Tears rolled shamingly down her cheeks as she sobbed, waiting hopelessly for the next. Is she with you? Mogadine said patiently. Do not waste time trying to make me kill you. I won't. You will live many years serving me. Your rather pitiful abilities might be of some use once I train them. Once I train you. But I can make you think that what you just felt was a lover's caress. Now answer my question. Nynaeve managed to gather breath. No, she wept. She ran off with a man after we left Tanchico. A man old enough to be her grandfather, but he had money. We heard what happened in the tower. She was sure Mogadine must know of that. And she was afraid to go back. The other woman laughed. A delightful tale. I can almost see what fascinates Semirag about breaking the spirit. Oh, you are going to provide me with a great deal of entertainment, Nynaeve Almira. But first, you are going to bring the girl Elaine to me. You will shield her and bind her and bring her to lie at my feet. You know why? Because some things are actually stronger in Tel Riod than in the waking world. That is why you will be a glossy white mare whenever I bring you here. And it is not only hurts taken here that last into waking. Compulsion is another. I want you to think of it for a moment or two before you begin believing it your own idea. I suspect that the girl is your friend, but you are going to bring her to me like a pet. Mogadine screamed as a silver arrow suddenly stuck its head out from below her right breast. Nynaeve fell to the ground like a dropped sack. The fall knocked every speck of breath from her lungs as surely as a hammer in the belly. Straining to breathe, she struggled to make racked muscles move, to fight through pain to Saidar. Staggering on her feet, Brigitta fumbled another arrow from her quiver. Go, Nynaeve! It was a mumbling shout. Get away! Brigitta's head wavered, and the silver bow wobbled as she raised it. The glow around Mogadine increased until it seemed as if the blinding sun surrounded her. The night folded in over Brigitta like an ocean wave, enveloping her in blackness. When it passed, the bow dropped atop empty clothes as they collapsed. The clothes faded like fog burning off, and only the bow and arrows remained, shining in the moonlight. Mogadine sank to her knees, panting, clutching the protruding arrow shaft with both hands as the glow around her faded and died. Then she vanished, and the silver arrow fell where she had been, stained dark with blood. After what seemed an eternity, Nynaeve managed to push up to hands and knees. Weeping, she crawled to Brigitta's bow. This time it was not pain that made tears come. Kneeling, naked and not caring, she clutched the bow. I'm sorry, she sobbed. Oh, Brigitta, forgive me. Brigitta. There was no answer except the mournful cry of a night bird. Leandrin leaped to her feet as the door to Mogadine's bedchamber crashed open and the Chosen staggered into the sitting room, blood soaking her silk shift. Chesmal and Tamail rushed to her side, each taking an arm to keep the woman on her feet, but Leandrin remained by her chair. The others were out, perhaps out of Amador for all Leandrin knew. Mogadine told only what she wanted the hearer to know, and punished questions she did not like. What happened? Tamail gasped. Mogadine's brief look should have fried her where she stood. You have some small ability with healing, the Chosen told Chesmal thickly. Blood stained her lips, trickled from the corner of her mouth in an increasing stream. Do it. Now, fool. The dark-haired Gildanan woman did not hesitate in laying hands to Mogadine's head. Leandrin sneered to herself as the glow surrounded Chesmal. Concern painted Chesmal's handsome face, and Tamail's delicate fox-like features were contorted with pure fright and worry. So faithful they were, such obedient lapdogs. Mogadine lifted up onto her toes, head flung back. Eyes wide, she shook, breath rushing from her gaping mouth as if she had been plunged into ice. In moments it was done. The glow around Chesmal disappeared, and Mogadine's heels settled to the blue and green patterned carpet. Without Tamail's support, she might have fallen. Only a part of the strength for healing came from the prayer. The rest came from the person being healed. Whatever wound had caused all that bleeding would be gone, but Mogadine was surely as weak as if she had lain in bed an invalid for weeks. She pulled the fine gold and ivory silk scarf from Tamail's belt to wipe her mouth as the woman helped her turn toward the bedchamber door. Weak, and her back turned. Leandrin struck as hard as she ever had with everything she had puzzled out of what the woman had done to her. Even as she did, Saidar seemed to fill Mogadine like a flood. Leandrin's probe died as the source was shielded from her. Flows of air picked her up and slammed her against the paneled wall hard enough to make her teeth rattle. Spread-eagled, helpless, she hung there. Chesmal and Tamail exchanged confused glances, as if they did not understand what had occurred. They continued to support Mogadine as she came to stand in front of Leandrin, still calmly wiping her mouth on Tamail's scarf. Mogadine channeled, and the blood on her shift turned black and flaked away, falling to the carpet. You do not understand, great mistress, Leandrin said frantically. I only wished to help you to have the good sleep. For once in her life, slipping back into the accents of a commoner did not concern her in the least. I only... She cut off with a strangled gagging as a flow of air seized her tongue, stretching it out between her teeth. Her brown eyes bulged, a hair more pressure, and... Shall I pull it out? Mogadine studied her face, but spoke as if to herself. I think not. A pity for you that the Almira woman makes me think like Senirag. Otherwise, I might only kill you. Suddenly, she was tying off the shield, the knot growing ever more intricate until Leandrin lost the twists and turns completely. And still it went on. There, Mogadine said finally, in tones of satisfaction. You will search a very long time to find anyone who can unravel that, but you will have no opportunity to search. Leandrin searched Chesmal's face and Tamail's for some sign of sympathy, pity, anything. Chesmal's eyes were cold and stern. Tamail's shone, and she touched her lips with the tip of her tongue and smiled. Not a friendly smile. You thought you had learned something of compulsion, Mogadine went on. I will teach you a bit more. For an instant, Leandrin shivered, Mogadine's eyes filling her vision as the woman's voice filled her ears, her entire head. Live. The instant passed, and sweat beaded on Leandrin's face as the chosen smiled at her. Compulsion has many limits, but a command to do what someone wants to do in their inmost depths will hold for a lifetime. You will live, however much you think you want to take your life, and you will think of it. You will lie weeping many nights, wishing for it. The flow holding Leandrin's tongue vanished, and she barely paused to swallow. "Please, great mistress, I swear I did not mean—" Her head rang, and silvery black spots danced before her eyes from Mogadin's slap. "There are attractions to doing a thing physically," the woman breathed. "Do you wish to beg more?" "Please, great mistress—" The second slap sent her hair flying. "More? Please!" A third nearly unhinged her jaw. Her cheek burned. "If you cannot be more inventive than that, I will not listen. You will listen instead. I think what I have planned for you would delight Semirag herself." Mogadin's smile was almost as dark as Tamail's. "You will live, not stilled, but knowing that you could channel again if only you found someone to untie your shield. Yet that is only the beginning. Evan will be glad of a new scullery girl, and I am sure the Arene woman will want to have long talks with you about her husband. Why, they will enjoy your company so much that I doubt you will see the outside of this house during the years to come. Long years in which to wish that you had served me faithfully." Leandrin shook her head, mouthing "no" and "please." She was crying too hard to force the words out. Turning her head to Tamail, Mogadin said, "Prepare her for them, and tell them they are not to kill or maim her. I want her always to believe she might escape. Even futile hope will keep her alive to suffer." She turned away on Chesnol's arm, and the flows holding Leandrin to the wall vanished. Her legs gave way like straw, crumpling her to the carpet. Only the shield remained. She hammered at it futilely as she crawled after Mogadin, trying to catch the hem of her shift, sobbing brokenly. "Please, great mistress." "They are with a menagerie," Mogadin told Chesnol. "All of your searching, and I had to find them myself. A menagerie should not be too difficult to locate." "I will serve faithfully," Leandrin wept. Fear turned her limbs to water. She could not crawl fast enough to catch up. They did not even look back at her, scrabbling across the carpet after them. "Find me, great mistress, anything. I will be the faithful dog." "There are many menageries traveling north," Chesmal said, eagerness to negate her failure filling her voice. "To Gildan, great mistress." "Then I must to Gildan," Mogadin said. "You will procure fast horses and follow—" The bedchamber door closed on her words. "I will be the faithful dog," Leandrin sobbed in a heap on the carpet. Lifting her head, she blinked tears away to see Tamail watching her, rubbing her arms and smiling. "We could overwhelm her, Tamail. We three together could—" "We three?" Tamail laughed. "You could not overwhelm Fat Evan." Her eyes narrowed as she studied the shield Leandrin. "You might as well be stilled." "Listen, please." Leandrin swallowed hard, trying to clear her voice, but it was still thick, if burning with urgency, when she went on at frantic speed. "We have spoken of the dissension that must rule among the chosen. If Mogadin hides herself so, she must hide from the other chosen. If we take her and give her to them, think of the places we could have. We could be exalted above kings and queens. We could be chosen ourselves." For a moment, one blessed, wonderful moment, the child-faced woman hesitated. Then she shook her head. "You have never known how high to lift your eyes. Who reaches for the sun will be burned. No, I think that I will not be burned for reaching too high. I think that I will do as I am told, and soften you for Evan." Suddenly she smiled, showing teeth that made her even more vulpine. "How surprised he will be when you crawl to kiss his feet." Leandrin started screaming before Tamail even began. Chapter 35. Ripped Away. Yawning, Elaine watched Nynaeve from her bed, her head propped up on one elbow and black hair spilling down her arm. It was really quite ridiculous, this insistence that whoever did not go to Tel Riyadh remain awake. She did not know how long an interval Nynaeve had experienced in the world of dreams, but Elaine had been lying here for a good 2 hours, with no book to read, no needlework to do, nothing at all to occupy her except staring at the other woman stretched out on her own narrow bed. Studying the Idom was no good. She thought she had wrung everything out of it that she could. She'd even tried a slight touch of healing on the sleeping woman, perhaps all the healing she knew. Nynaeve would never have consented to it awake. She did not think much of Elaine's abilities in that direction. Or maybe she would have in this case, but her black eye was gone. In truth, that was the most complicated healing Elaine had ever done, and it really had exhausted her skill. Nothing to do. If she had some silver, she might have tried making an Idom. Silver was not the only metal, but she would have to melt coins to get enough. The other woman would be less pleased at that than at finding a second Idom. If Nynaeve had been willing to tell Tom and Julian about this, at least she could have invited Tom in for conversation. They really did have the most delightful talks, like a father passing on his knowledge to his daughter. She had never realized that the game of houses was so deeply embedded in Andor, if thankfully not so deeply as it was in some other lands. Only the borderlands escaped it entirely, according to Tom. With the Blight right to the north and Trolloc raids a daily fact, they had no time for maneuvering and scheming. She and Tom had wonderful talks, now that he was sure she was not going to try snuggling into his lap. Her face burned at the memory. She had actually thought of that once or twice, and mercifully had not quite brought herself to it. "Even a queen stubs her toe, but a wise woman watches the path," she quoted softly. Leanie was a wise woman. Elaine did not think she would make that particular mistake again. She knew she made many, but seldom the same twice. One day, perhaps, she would make few enough to be worthy to follow her mother on the throne. Suddenly she sat up. Tears were leaking from Nynaeve's closed eyes, trickling down the sides of her face. What Elaine had taken for a faint snore, Nynaeve did snore, whatever she said, was a tiny whimpering sob deep in her throat. That should not be. If she had been injured, the hurt would have appeared, although she would not feel it here until she woke. Perhaps I should wake her. But she hesitated, even as her hand stretched toward the other woman. Waking someone out of Tel Riyadh was far from easy. Shaking, even icy water in the face, would not always do, and Nynaeve would not appreciate being pummeled awake after the bruising Sarandon had given her. I wonder what really happened. I will have to ask Sarandon. Whatever was going on, Nynaeve should be able to step out of the dream whenever she wished, unless... Egwene said that the wise ones could hold someone in Tel Riyadh against their will, though if they had taught her the trick, she had not passed it on to Elaine or Nynaeve. If someone was holding Nynaeve now, hurting her, it could not be Birgitta or the wise ones. Well, the wise ones might if they caught her wandering where they thought she should not, but if not them, that left only... She took hold of Nynaeve's shoulders to shake her. If that did not work, she would freeze the pitcher of water on the table, or slap her face silly. And Nynaeve's eyes popped open. Immediately, Nynaeve began to weep aloud, the most despairing sound Elaine had ever heard. I killed her! Oh, Elaine, I killed her with my foolish pride, thinking I could... The words trailed off in open-mouthed sobs. You killed who? It could not be Mogadune. That woman's death would surely not bring this grief. She was about to take Nynaeve in her arms to comfort her when a pounding came at the door. Send them away, Nynaeve mumbled, curling herself into a trembling ball in the middle of the bed. Sighing, Elaine made her way to the door and pulled it open, but before she could say a word, Tom pushed past her out of the night, rumpled shirt bagging out of his breeches, carrying someone shrouded in his cloak in his arms. Only a woman's bare feet showed. "She was just there," Julian said behind him, as if he did not believe the words coming out of his own mouth. Both men were barefoot, and Julian was stripped to the waist, lean and hairless-chested. "I woke for a moment, and suddenly she was standing there, naked as the day she was born, collapsing like a cut net." "She's alive," Tom said, laying the cloak-wrapped figure on Elaine's bed, "but only barely. I could hardly hear her heart." Frowning, Elaine pulled aside the cloak's hood and found herself staring at Brigitta's face, pale and wan. Nynaeve scrambled stiffly from the other bed to kneel beside the unconscious woman. Her face glistened with tears, but her weeping had stopped. "She is alive," she breathed. "She is alive." Abruptly, she seemed to realize that she was in her shift in front of the men, but she barely spared them a glance, and all she said was, "Get them out of here, Elaine. I can do nothing with them gawking like sheep." Tom and Julian rolled their eyes toward each other when Elaine made a hurting motion at them and shook their heads slightly, but they backed toward the door without complaint. "She is a friend," Elaine told them. She felt as if she were moving in a dream, floating without feeling. How could this be? "We will take care of her." How could it possibly have happened? "Now don't say a word to anyone." The looks they gave her as she closed the door nearly made her blush. Of course they knew better than to talk, but men did have to be reminded of the simplest things sometimes, even Tom. "Nynaeve, how under the light—" she began, turning, and cut off as the glow of Saidar surrounded the kneeling woman. "Burn her," Nynaeve growled, channeling fiercely. "Burn her forever for doing this." Elaine the flows being woven for healing, but recognition was as far as she could go. "I will fire her," Nynaeve muttered. Strands of spirit predominated, but water and air were in there, and even fire. It looked as complicated as embroidering one dress with either hand and two more with your feet. Blindfolded. "I will make her pay." The glow shining about Nynaeve grew and grew until it overwhelmed the lamps, until it hurt to look at her except through slitted eyes. "I swear it. By the light and my hope of salvation and rebirth, I will." The anger in her voice changed, becoming deeper if anything. "It isn't working. There is nothing wrong with her to heal. She is as perfect as anyone can be. But she is dying. Oh, light! I can feel her slipping away. Burn Mogadine! Burn her and burn me along with her." She was not giving up, though. The weaving continued, complex flows weaving into Brigitta. And the woman lay there, golden braid flung over the side of the bed, the rise and fall of her chest slowing. "I can do something that might help," Elaine said slowly. "You were supposed to have permission, but it had not always been so. Once it had been done almost as often without as with. There was no reason it should not work on a woman, except that she had never heard of it being done to any but men." Blinking, Nynaeve did not look away from the woman on the bed or stop her efforts with the power. "Yes, you will have to do it. I don't know how, but let me guide. I do not know half of what I am doing right this minute, but I know that I can do it. You could not heal a bruise." Elaine's mouth tightened, but she let the remark lie. "Not linking." The amount of Saidar that Nynaeve had drawn into herself was amazing. If she could not heal Brigitta with that, what Elaine could add would not make a difference. Together they would be stronger than either apart, but not as strong as if their two strengths were simply added. Besides, she was not certain that she could link. She'd only been linked once, and an Aes Sedai had done it, to show her what it was like, more than how. "Stop, Nynaeve. You said yourself it is not working. Stop and let me try. If it doesn't work, you can—" She could what? If healing worked, it worked. If it did not, there was no point in trying again if it failed. "Try what?" Nynaeve snapped, yet she moved away awkwardly, letting Elaine come close. The weave of healing faded, but not the shining nimbus. Instead of answering, Elaine put one hand on Brigitta's forehead. Physical contact was as necessary for this as for healing, and the 2 times she had watched it done in the tower, the Aes Sedai had touched the man's forehead. The flows of spirit she wove were complex, if not so intricate as Nynaeve's of a moment before. She barely understood some of what she was doing, and none at all of other parts, yet she had paid close attention from her hiding place to how the weave was shaped. Watched closely, because she had built up a stock of stories in her head, made silly romances where there so seldom were any. After a moment she sat down on the other bed and let Saidar go. Nynaeve frowned at her, then bent to examine Brigitta. The unconscious woman's color was perhaps a little better, her breathing a little stronger. "What did you do, Elaine?" Nynaeve did not take her eyes from Brigitta, but the glow around her faded away slowly. "It wasn't healing. I think I could do it myself now, but it was not healing." "Will she live?" Elaine asked faintly. There was no visible link between her and Brigitta, no flows, but she could sense the woman's weakness, a terrible weakness. She would know the moment Brigitta died, even if she was sleeping or hundreds of miles away. "I do not know. She isn't fading anymore, but I do not know." Weariness made Nynaeve's voice soft, and pain touched it strongly, as if she shared Brigitta's injury. Wincing, she rose and unfolded a red-striped blanket to spread over the woman lying there. "What did you do?" Silence held Elaine long enough for Nynaeve to join her, lowering herself awkwardly onto the bed. "Bonding," Elaine said finally. "I bonded her as a warder." The incredulous stare on the other woman's face made her rush on. "Healing was doing no good. I had to do something. You know the gifts a warder gets from being bonded. One is strength, energy. He can keep going when other men would collapse and die, survive wounds that would kill anyone else. It was the only thing I could think of." Nynaeve drew a deep breath. "Well, it is working better than what I did, at least. A woman warder. I wonder what Lan will think of that. No reason why she shouldn't be. If any woman can, it would be her." Wincing, she curled her legs up beneath her. Her gaze kept returning to Brigitta. "You will have to keep this secret. If anyone learns that an accepted has bonded a warder, whatever the circumstances—" Elaine shivered. "I know," she said simply and quite fervently. It was not quite a stilling offense, but any Aes Sedai would very likely make her wish she had been stilled. "Nynaeve, what happened?" For a long moment she thought the other woman was going to start crying again as her chin quivered and her lips worked. When she began speaking, her voice was iron, her face a blend of fury and too many tears ever to be shed. She told the tale mechanically, almost sketchily, until she came to Moghedin's appearance among the wagons. That she rendered in painful detail. "I should be welted from the neck down," she said bitterly at last, touching a smooth, unmarked arm. Unmarked or not, she flinched. "I don't understand why I am not. I feel it, but I deserve the welts for stupid, foolish pride, for being too afraid to do what I should. I deserved being hung up like a ham in a smokehouse. If there was any justice, I would still be dangling there, and Brigitta would not be lying on that bed, with us wondering whether she'll live or not. If only I knew more. If only I could have Moghedin's knowledge for 5 minutes, I could heal her. I am sure of it." "If you were still hanging," Elaine said practically, "in a very short while you would be waking up and shielding me. I don't doubt Moghedin would have seen to it that you were angry enough to channel. She knows us all too well, remember? And I do doubt very much that I would have suspected anything until you had done it. I do not fancy being carted off to Moghedin, and I cannot believe you do either." The other woman did not look at her. "It must have been a link, Nynaeve, like an idam. That is how she made you feel pain without marking you." Nynaeve still sat there in a glowering sulk. Nynaeve, Brigitta is alive. You did everything you could for her, and the light willing, she will live. It was Mokadeen who did this to her, not you. A soldier who takes blame for comrades who fall in battle is a fool. You and I are soldiers in a battle, but you are not a fool, so stop behaving like one. Nynaeve did look at her then, a scowl that lasted only a moment before she turned her face completely away. You don't understand. Her voice sank almost to a whisper. She was one of the heroes bound to the wheel of time, destined to be born again and again to make legends. She wasn't born this time, Elaine. She was ripped out of Tel Riyadh as she stood. Is she still bound to the wheel? Or has she been ripped away from that, too? Ripped away from what her own courage earned her because I was so proud, so man-stubborn stupid that I made her hunt for Mokadeen. Elaine had hoped that those questions had not occurred to Nynaeve yet. Would not until she had had a little time to recover first. Do you know how badly Mokadeen was hurt? Maybe she is dead. I hope not, the other woman almost snarled. I want to make her pay. She took a deep breath, but instead of invigorating her, it seemed to make her sag. I would not count on her dying. Brigitta's shot missed her heart. A wonder she managed to hit the woman at all, staggering as she was. I would not have stood up if I were thrown that far, hard enough to bounce like that. I couldn't even stand up after what Mokadeen did to me. No, she is alive, and we'd best believe that she can have her wound healed and be after us by morning. She would still need time to rest, Nynaeve, you know that. Can she even know where we are? From what you said, she had no time to do more than see that this is a menagerie. What if she did see more? Nynaeve rubbed her temples as if it were difficult to think. What if she knows exactly where we are? She could send dark friends after us, or send word to dark friends in Samara. Luca is livid because 11 menageries are already around the city, and 3 more are waiting to cross the bridge. Nynaeve, it will take her days to regain strength after a wound like that, even if she does find some black sister to heal her, or one of the other Forsaken. And more days to search through 15 menageries. That is, if there are not more on the road behind us or coming from Altara. If she does come after us or send dark friends, either one, we are forewarned, and we have days to find a boat that can carry us downriver. She paused a moment, thinking, do you have anything to dye your hair in that bag of herbs? I'll wager anything that you had your hair braided in Tel Riyadh. Mine is always its real color there. If yours is loose, as it is now, and another color, it will make us that much harder to find. Everywhere, Nynaeve sighed. Galad, the prophet, no boats. It is as if everything is conspiring to hold us here for Mokadeen. I'm so tired, Elaine. Tired of being afraid of who might be around the next corner. Tired of being afraid of Mokadeen. I cannot seem to think of what to do next. My hair? Nothing that would make it any color I'd have. You need to sleep, Elaine said firmly. Without the ring. Give it to me. The other woman hesitated, but Elaine merely waited with her hand outstretched until Nynaeve fished the flecked stone ring from the cord around her neck. Stuffing it into her pouch, Elaine went on, Now you lie down here and I will watch Brigitta. Nynaeve stared at the woman stretched out on the other bed for a moment, then shook her head. I can't sleep. I need to be alone, to walk. Getting to her feet as stiffly as if she really had been beaten, she took her dark cloak from its peg and swung it over her shift. At the door, she paused. If she wants to kill me, she said bleakly, I do not know that I could make myself stop her. She went into the night, barefoot and sad-faced. Elaine hesitated, unsure which woman needed her more, before settling back where she sat. Nothing she said could make things better for Nynaeve, but she had faith in the woman's resilience. Time alone to work it all over in her mind, and she would see that blame lay at Mokadeen's door, not hers. She had to. Chapter 36. A New Name. For a long time Elaine sat there watching Brigitta sleep. It did seem to be sleep. Once she stirred, muttering in a desperate voice, "Wait for me, Gadel. Wait. I'm coming, Gadel. Wait for—" Words trailed off into slow breath again. Was it stronger? The woman still looked deathly ill, better than she had, but pale and drawn. After perhaps an hour, Nynaeve returned, her feet dirty. Fresh tears shone on her cheeks. "I could not stay away," she said, hanging her cloak back on its peg. "You sleep. I will watch her. I have to watch her." Elaine rose slowly, smoothing her skirts. Perhaps watching over Brigitta for a time would help Nynaeve work matters out. "I don't feel like sleeping yet either." She was exhausted, but not sleepy any longer. "I think I will stroll outside myself." Nynaeve only nodded as she took Elaine's place on the bed, her dusty feet dangling over the side, her eyes fastened to Brigitta. To Elaine's surprise, Tom and Julian were not asleep either. They had built a small fire beside the wagon and sat on either side of it, cross-legged on the ground, smoking their long-stemmed pipes. Tom had tucked his shirt in, and Julian had donned his coat, though no shirt, and turned the cuffs back. She took a look around before joining them. No one stirred in the camp, dark except for the light of this one fire and the glow of the lamps from their wagon's windows. Neither man said anything while she settled her skirts. Then Julian looked at Tom, who nodded, and the thief-catcher took something from the ground and held it out to her. "I found it where she was lying," the dark man said, as if it had dropped from her hand. Elaine took the silver arrow slowly. Even the fletching feathers appeared to be silver. "Distinctive," Tom said conversationally around his pipe, "and added to the braid. Every story mentions the braid for some reason, though I found some I think might be her under other names without it, and some under other names with." "I do not care about stories," Julian put in. He sounded no more agitated than Tom, but then it took a great deal to agitate either one of them. "Is it her? Bad enough if it isn't, a woman appearing naked out of nothing like that, but what have you gotten us into? You and Nana?" He was troubled. Julian did not make mistakes, and his tongue never slipped. Tom merely bubbled at his pipe, waiting. Elaine turned the arrow in her hands, pretending to study it. "She is a friend," she said finally. Unless Brigitta released her, her promise held. "She is not Aes Sedai, but she has been helping us." They looked at her, waiting for her to say more. "Why didn't you give this to Nynaeve?" One of those glances passed between them. Men seemed to carry on entire conversations through glances, around women at least, saying as clearly as spoken words what they thought of her keeping secrets, especially when they all but knew for certain already. But she had given her word. "She seemed upset," Julian said, sucking at his pipe judiciously, and Tom took his from between his teeth and blew out his white mustaches. "Upset? The woman came out in her shift looking lost, and when I asked if I could help her, she didn't snap my head off. She cried on my shoulder." He plucked at his linen shirt, muttering something about dampness. "Elaine, she apologized for every cross word she has ever said to me, which is very nearly every other word out of her mouth. Said she ought to be switched, or maybe that she had been. She was incoherent half the time. She said she was a coward and a stubborn fool. I don't know what is the matter with her, but she isn't herself by a mile." "I knew a woman who behaved like this once," Julian said, peering into the fire. "She woke to find the burglar in her bedchamber and stabbed the man through the heart. Only when she lit a lamp, it was her husband. His boat had come back to the docks early. She walked around like Nynaeve for half a month." His mouth tightened. "Then she hanged herself." "I hate to lay this burden on you, child," Tom added gently, "but if she can be helped, you are the only one of us who can do it. I know how to take a man out of his miseries, give him a swift kick, or else get him drunk and find him a—" He harumphed loudly, trying to make it seem a cough, and knuckled his mustaches. The one bad thing about him seeing her as a daughter was that now sometimes he seemed to think she was perhaps 12. Anyway, the point is that I do not know how to do this, and while Julian might be willing to dandle her on his knee, I doubt she'd thank him for it. I would sooner dandle a fangfish, the thief-catcher muttered, but not as roughly as he would have yesterday. He was as concerned as Tom, though less willing to admit it. I will do what I can, she assured them, turning the arrow again. They were good men, and she did not like lying to them or hiding things from them, not unless it was absolutely necessary anyway. Nynaeve claimed that you had to manage men for their own good, but there was such a thing as taking it too far. It was not right to lead a man into dangers he knew nothing of. So she told them. About Tel'aran Riyadh and the Forsaken being loose, about Mugad'Din. Not quite everything, of course. Some events in Tanchico had been too shaming for her to want to think of them. Her promise held her concerning Brigitta's identity, and there was certainly no need to go into detail about what Mugad'Din had done to Nynaeve. It made explaining this night's happenings a little difficult, yet she managed. She did tell them everything she thought they should know, enough to make them aware for the first time what they were really up against. Not just the Black Ajah, that had certainly made them stare cross-eyed when they learned it, but the Forsaken, and one of them very likely hunting her and Nynaeve. And she made it quite plain that they too would be hunting Mugad'Din as well, and that anyone close to them was in danger of being caught between hunter and prey either way. Now that you know, she finished, the choice to stay or go is yours. She left it at that, and was careful not to look at Tom. She hoped almost desperately that he would stay, but she would not let him think that she was asking, not by so much as a glance. I haven't taught you half what you need to know if you're to be as good a queen as your mother, he said, trying to sound gruff, and spoiling it by brushing a strand of black-dyed hair from her cheek with a gnarled finger. You'll not rid yourself of me this easily, child. I mean to see you mistress of Desdemar if I must drone in your ear until you go deaf. I haven't even taught you to handle a knife. I tried to teach your mother, but she always said she could tell a man to use a knife if one needed using. Fool way to look at it. She leaned forward and kissed his leathery cheek, and he blinked, bushy eyebrows shooting up, then smiled and stuck his pipe back into his mouth. You can kiss me, too, Julian said dryly. Randall Thor will have my guts for fish bait if I don't hand you back to him in the same health he last saw you. Elaine lifted her chin. I will not have you stay for Randall Thor, Julian. Hand her back, indeed. You will stay only if you want to, and I do not release you, or you, Tom, he had grinned at the thief-catcher's comment, from your promise to do as you were told. Tom's startled look was quite satisfying. She turned back to Julian. You will follow me, and Nynaeve, of course, knowing full well the enemies we face, or you may pack your belongings and ride Skulker where you wish. I will give him to you. Julian sat up straight as a post, his dark face going darker. I have never abandoned a woman in danger in my life. He pointed his pipe stem at her like a weapon. You send me away and I will be on your heels like a soarer on a stern chase. Not exactly what she wanted, but it would do. Very well, then. Rising, she held herself erect, the silver arrow at her side, and kept her slightly frosty manner. She thought they had finally realized who was in charge. Morning is not far off. Had Rand actually had the nerve to tell Julian to hand her back? Tom would just have to suffer along with the other man for a time, and it served him right for that grin. You will put out this fire and go to sleep. Now. No excuses, Tom. You'll be no good at all tomorrow without sleep. Obediently, they began scuffing dirt over the flames with their boots, but when she reached the plain wooden steps of the wagon, she heard Tom say, Sounds like her mother sometimes. Then I am glad I have never met the woman, Julian grumbled in reply. Flip for first guard? Tom murmured an assent. She almost went back, but found herself smiling instead. Men. It was a fond thought. Her good mood lasted until she was inside. Nynaeve sat on the very edge of the bed, holding herself up with both hands, eyes trying to drift shut as she watched Brigitta. Her feet were still dirty. Elaine put Brigitta's arrow into one of the cupboards behind some rough sacks of dried peas. Luckily, the other woman never so much as glanced at her. She did not think the sight of the silver arrow was what Nynaeve needed right at that moment. But what was? Nynaeve, it is past time for you to wash your feet and go to sleep. Nynaeve swayed in her direction, blinking sleepily. Feet? What? I must watch her. It would have to be one step at a time. Your feet, Nynaeve. They are dirty. Wash them. Frowning, Nynaeve peered down at her dusty feet, then nodded. She spilled water, tipping the big white pitcher over the wash basin, and sloshed more out before she was washed and ready to towel dry, but even then she resumed her seat. I must watch, in case... She cried out once. For Gadel. Elaine pressed her back on the mattress. You need sleep, Nynaeve. You can't keep your eyes open. I can, Nynaeve muttered sullenly, trying to sit up against Elaine's pressure on her shoulders. I must watch her, Elaine, I must. Nynaeve made the two men outside look sensible and biddable. Even if Elaine had had a mind to, there was no way to get her drunk and find her a pretty young man, she supposed it would have to be. That left a swift kick. Sympathy and common sense had surely made no impression. I have had enough of this sulking and self-pity, Nynaeve, she said firmly. You are going to sleep now, and in the morning you are not going to say one word about what a miserable wretch you are. If you cannot behave like the clear-headed woman you are, I will ask Sarandon to give you 2 black eyes for the one I took away. You did not even thank me for that. Now go to sleep. Nynaeve's eyes widened indignantly. At least she did not look on the point of tears, but Elaine slid them shut with her fingers. They closed easily, and despite softly murmured protests, the deep, slow breath of sleep followed quickly. Elaine patted Nynaeve's shoulder before straightening. She hoped it was a peaceful sleep with dreams of Lan, but any sort of sleep was better for her now than none. Fighting a yawn, she bent to check Brigitta. She could not tell whether the woman's color or breathing was any better. There was nothing to do but wait and hope. The lamps did not seem to be bothering either of the women, so she left them alight and sat on the floor between the beds. They should help keep her awake. Not that she knew why she should remain awake, really. She had done what she could, as much as Nynaeve had. Unthinkingly, she leaned back against the front wall, and her chin sank slowly to her chest. The dream was a pleasant one, if odd. Rand knelt before her, and she put a hand on his head and bonded him as her warder. One of her warders. She would have to choose Green now, with Brigitta. There were other women there, faces changing between one glance and the next. Nynaeve, Min, Moiraine, Avienda, Berelaine, Amathera, Leandrin. Others she did not know. Whoever they were, she knew that she had to share him with them, because in the dream she was certain that that was what Min had viewed. She was not sure how she felt about that. Some of those faces she wanted to claw to shreds, but if it was fated by the pattern, it would have to be. Yet she would have one thing of him the others could never have, the bond between warder and Aes Sedai. Where is this place? Berelaine said, raven-haired and so beautiful that Elaine wanted to bare her teeth. The woman wore the low-cut red dress that Luca wanted Nynaeve to wear. She always dressed revealingly. Wake up! This is not Tel'aran Riyadh. Elaine started awake to find Brigitta leaning over the side of the bed, gripping her arm weakly. Her face was too pale and damp with sweat as if a fever had broken, but her blue eyes were sharp and intent on Elaine's face. This is not Tel'aran Riyadh. It was not a question, but Elaine nodded, and Brigitta sank back with a long sigh. I remember everything, she whispered. I am here as I am, and I remember. All is changed. Gadel is out there somewhere, an infant, or even a young boy. But even if I find him, what will he think of a woman more than old enough to be his mother? She scrubbed angrily at her eyes, muttering, I do not cry. I never cry. I remember that the light helped me. I never cry." Elaine got up on her knees beside the woman's bed. "You will find him, Brigitta." She kept her voice low. Nynaeve still seemed sound asleep. A small, rasping snore rose from her regularly, but she needed rest, not to confront this all over again now. "Somehow you will, and he will love you. I know he will." "Do you think that is what matters? I could stand him not loving me." Her glistening eyes gave her the lie. "He will need me, Elaine, and I will not be there. He always has more courage than is good for him. I always must supply him with caution. Worse, he will wander, searching for me, not knowing what he is looking for, not knowing why he feels incomplete. We are always together, Elaine, two halves of a whole." The tears welled up, flowing across her face. "Mogadine said she would make me cry forever, and she—" Suddenly her features contorted. Low, ragged sobs came as if ripped from her throat. Elaine gathered the taller woman into her arms, murmuring words of comfort she knew were useless. How would she feel if Rand were taken away from her? The thought was nearly enough to make her put her head down atop Brigitta's and join her weeping. She was not sure how long it took Brigitta to cry herself out, but eventually she pushed Elaine away and settled back, wiping her cheeks with her fingers. "I have never done that except as a small child. Never." Twisting her neck, she frowned at Nynaeve, still asleep on the other bed. "Did Mogadine hurt her badly? I have not seen anyone trust like that since the Turag took Marish." Elaine must have looked confused, because she added, "In another age. Is she hurt?" "Not badly. Her spirit, mainly. What you did allowed her to escape, but only after—" Elaine could not make herself say it. Too many wounds were too fresh. "She blames herself. She thinks that everything is her fault for asking you to help." "If she had not asked me, Mogadine would be teaching her to beg right now. She has as little caution as Gadol." Brigitta's dry tone sounded odd with her wet cheeks. "She did not drag me into this by my hair. If she claims responsibility for the consequences, then she claims responsibility for my actions." If anything, she sounded angry. "I am a free woman, and I made my own choices. She did not decide for me." "I must say you are taking this better than I would." She could not say better than Nynaeve. That was true, but the other was as well. "I always say, if you must mount the gallows, give a jest to the crowd, a coin to the hangman, and make the drop with a smile on your lips." Brigitta's smile was grim. "Mogadine sprang the trap, but my neck is not yet snapped. Perhaps I will surprise her before it is done." The smile faded into a frown as she studied Elaine. "I can feel you. I think I could close my eyes and point to you a mile away." Elaine took a very deep breath. "I bonded you as a warder," she said in a rush. "You were dying, and healing did no good, and—" The woman was looking at her, not frowning any more, but her eyes were disconcertingly sharp. "There was no other choice, Brigitta. You would have died else." "A warder," Brigitta said slowly. "I think I remember hearing a tale of a female warder, but it was in a life so long ago that I cannot remember more than that." It was time for another deep breath, and this time she had to force the words. "There is something you should know. You will discover it sooner or later, and I've decided not to keep things from people who have a right to know, not unless I absolutely must." A third breath. "I'm not Aes Sedai. I'm only accepted." For a long moment the golden-braided woman stared up at her, then slowly shook her head. "An accepted. In the Trolloc Wars I knew an accepted who bonded a fellow. Barashel was due to be tested the next day for raising to full Aes Sedai, and certain to be given the shawl, but she was afraid that a woman testing that same day would take him. In the Trolloc Wars the Tower tried to raise women as quickly as possible, from necessity." "What happened?" Elaine could not stop herself from asking. "Barashel? That name sounded familiar." Lacing her fingers over the blanket atop her bosom, Brigitta shifted her head on the pillow and put on a look of mock sympathy. Needless to say, she was not allowed to take the tests once it was discovered. Necessity did not outweigh such an offense. They made her pass the poor fellow's bond to another, and to teach her patience, put her into the kitchens among the scullions and spit girls. I heard that she stayed there 3 years, and when she did receive her shawl, the Amerlin seat herself chose her warder, a leather-faced, stone-stubborn man named Anselan. I saw them a few years after, and I could not tell which of them gave the commands. I do not think Barachel was certain either. Not pleasant, Elaine muttered. 3 years in the... Wait. Barachel and Anselan? It could not be the same pair. That story said nothing about Barachel being Aes Sedai, but she had read 2 versions and heard Tom tell another, and all had Barachel doing some long, arduous service to earn Anselan's love. 2,000 years could change a great deal in a story. Not pleasant, Brigitta agreed, and suddenly her eyes were much too large and innocent in her pale face. I suppose, since you wish me to keep your dreadful secret, you will not ride me as hard as some Aes Sedai ride their warders. It would not do to push me to tell just to escape you. Elaine's chin came up instinctively. That sounds very like a threat. I do not take well to threats from you or anyone else. If you think... The reclining woman caught her arm and cut her off apologetically. Her grip was noticeably stronger. Please, I did not intend it that way. Gadol claims I have a sense of humor like a rock tossed into a shoja circle. A cloud swept across her face at Gadol's name and was gone. You saved my life, daughter heir of Andor. I will keep your secret and serve you as warder, and be your friend if you will have me. I will be proud to have you for friend. Shoja circle? She would ask all the time. Brigitta might be stronger, but she needed rest, not questions. And for warder, it seemed that she really was going to choose the green Aja. Aside from everything else, that was the only way she could bond Rand. The dream was still clear in her mind, and she intended to convince him to accept it one way or another. Perhaps you could try to moderate your sense of humor? I will try. Brigitta sounded as if she were saying she would try to pick up a mountain. But if I am to be your warder, even in secret, then I will be warder to you. You can barely hold your eyes open. It is time for you to sleep. Elaine's eyebrows and chin shot up together, but the woman gave her no opportunity to speak. Among many other things, it is a warder's place to tell her Aes Sedai when she pushes herself too hard. Also to provide a dose of caution when she thinks she can walk into the pit of doom, and to keep her alive so she can do what she must. I will do these things for you. Never fear for your back when I am near, Elaine. She did need sleep, she supposed, but Brigitta needed it more. Elaine dimmed the lamps and got the woman settled and asleep, though not until Brigitta had seen her put a pillow and blankets on the floor between the beds for herself. There was some slight argument over who would sleep on the floor, but Brigitta was still weak enough that Elaine had no trouble making her stay in the bed. Well, not very much, anyway. At least Nynaeve's soft snore never broke. She herself did not go to sleep immediately, whatever she had told Brigitta. The woman could not put her nose outside the wagon until she had something to wear, and she was taller than Elaine or Nynaeve. Sitting down between the beds, Elaine began letting out the hem on her dark gray silk riding dress. There would hardly be time in the morning for more than a quick fitting and stitching the new hem. Sleep overtook her with her ripping no more than half done. She had the dream of bonding Rand again, more than once. Sometimes he knelt voluntarily, and sometimes she had to do what she had done with Brigitta, even sneaking into his bedchamber while he slept. Brigitta was one of the other women now. Elaine did not mind that too much. Not her, or Min, or Egwene, or Avienda, or Nynaeve, though she could not imagine what Lan would say to that last. Others, though. She had just ordered Brigitta in a warder's color-shifting cloak to drag Berylane and Elida to the kitchens for 3 years, when suddenly the two women began pummeling her. She awakened to find Nynaeve trampling her to reach Brigitta and check on the woman. The gray light just before dawn showed in the small windows. Brigitta woke claiming she was as strong as ever, and ravenous besides. Elaine was not certain whether Nynaeve had finished her bout of self-blame. She did not wring her hands or speak of it, but while Elaine washed her face and hands and explained about the menagerie and why they had to remain with it a while longer, Nynaeve hastily peeled and cored red pears and yellow apples, sliced cheese, and handed it all to Brigitta on a plate with a cup of watered wine with honey and spices. She would have fed the woman had Brigitta let her. Nynaeve washed Brigitta's hair and wiped hen pepper herself until it was as black as Elaine's. Elaine did her own, of course, donated her best stockings and shift, and looked disappointed when a pair of Elaine's slippers fit better. She insisted on helping Brigitta into the gray silk as soon as her hair had been toweled dry and braided again. The hips and bosom needed letting out, too, but that would have to wait, and even wanted to stitch the hem herself, until Elaine's incredulous stare made her retreat to her own ablutions, muttering as she scrubbed her face that she could sew as well as anyone, when she wanted to. When they went outside at last, the first sharp golden edge of the sun was peeking above the trees to the east. For this little while the day felt deceptively comfortable. There was not a cloud to be seen in the sky, and by noon the air would be hot and gritty. Tom and Julian were hitching the team to the wagon, and the whole camp bustled in preparation for moving. Skulker was already saddled, and Elaine made a note to herself to speak up about riding today herself before one of the men took possession of the saddle. Even if Tom or Julian got there first, though, she would not be too disappointed. This very afternoon she would high-walk in front of people for the first time. The costume Luca had shown her made her a little nervous, but at least she was not moaning about it as Nynaeve did. Luca himself came striding rapidly through the camp, red cloak fluttering behind, chivying and shouting unneeded instructions. "Lattell, wake those bloody bears. I want them on their feet, snarling when we drive through Samara. Clarine, you watch those dogs this time. If one of them goes chasing after a cat again. Brugh, you and your brothers do your tumbling just ahead of my wagon, mind. Just ahead. This is supposed to be a stately procession, not a race to see which of you can backflip the fastest. Sarandon, keep those boar horses in hand. I want people to gasp in amazement, not run in terror." He stopped at their wagon, glowering at Nynaeve and herself equally, with a bit left over for Brigitta. "Kind of you to decide to come with the rest of us, Mistress Nana, my Lady Morellin. I thought you meant to sleep until midday." He nodded toward Brigitta. "Having a chat with someone from across the river, are you? Well, we've no time for visitors. I mean to be set up and performing by noon." Nynaeve looked taken aback by the onslaught, but by the end of his second sentence she was meeting him glare for glare. Whatever her awkwardness toward Brigitta, it apparently did not hinder her temper where others were concerned. "We will be ready as soon as anyone, and you know it, Valen Luca. Besides, an hour or two will make no difference anyway. There are enough people gathered on the other side of the river that if 1 in 100 comes to your show, it will be more than you ever dreamed. If we decide to make a leisurely breakfast, you can just twiddle your thumbs and wait. You'll not get what you want if you leave us behind." That was her bluntest reminder yet of the promised 100 gold marks, but for once it did not slow him. "Enough people? Enough people? People must be attracted, woman. Chin Akima has been in place 3 days, and he has a fellow who juggles swords and axes, and 9 acrobats. 9! Some woman I've never heard of has 2 women acrobats who do things on a hanging rope that would make the Chavana's eyes pop. You would not believe the crowds. Cilia Serrano has men with their faces painted like court fools, splashing each other with water and hitting each other over the head with bladders, and people are paying an extra silver penny just to watch." Suddenly his eyes narrowed, focusing on Brigitta. "Would you be willing to paint your face? Cilia doesn't have a woman among her fools. Some of the horse handlers would be willing. It doesn't hurt getting hit with an inflated bladder, and I will pay you—" He trailed off, musing. He did not like parting with money any more than Nynaeve did, and Brigitta spoke into his momentary silence. I am not a fool, and will not be a fool. I am an archer. An archer, he muttered, eyeing the intricate glossy black braid pulled over her left shoulder. And I suppose you call yourself Brigitta. What are you? One of those idiots hunting the horn of Valir? Even if the thing exists, what chance any one of you will find it more than another? I was in Ilion when the hunters' oaths were given, and there were thousands in the great square of Tamaz. But for glory that you can attain, nothing can outshine the applause of I am an archer, pretty man, Brigitta broke in firmly. Fetch a bow, and I will outshoot you or anyone you name. 100 crowns gold to your one. Elaine expected Nynaeve to yelp. It was they who would have to cover the wager if Brigitta lost, and whatever she claimed, Elaine did not think Brigitta could be fully recovered already. Yet all Nynaeve did was close her eyes briefly and draw a deep, long breath. Women, Luca growled. Tom and Julian did not have to look as if they agreed. You are a fine match for the Lady Morellin and Nana, or whatever their names are. He swept his silk cloak in a wide gesture at the surrounding hustle of men and horses. It may have escaped your keen eye, Brigitta, but I have a show to get underway, and my rivals are already draining Samara of coin like the cut-purses they are. Brigitta smiled, a slight curving of her lips. Are you afraid, pretty man? We can make your side a silver penny. Elaine thought Luca might have apoplexy from the color that crept into his face. His neck suddenly looked too big for his collar. I will fetch my bow, he almost hissed. You can work off the 100 marks with your face painted or killed in cages
Soy, how
for
you
all
doing?
I care.
Hope you're doing good.
Are you sure that you are well enough?
Good to see
Elaine
you.
asked Brigitta as he stalked off, muttering to himself. The only word she caught was a repeat of women. Nynaeve was looking at the woman with the braid as if she wanted the ground to open and swallow her. Herself, not Brigitta. A number of the horse handlers had gathered around Tom and Julian for some reason. He has nice legs, Brigitta said, but I have never liked tall men. Add a pretty face, and they are always insufferable. Petra had joined the group of men, twice as wide as any other. He
I
said
got my
something,
dab pen.
then
I
shook
can't
hands
use
with
my dab
Tom.
rig just
The
yet.
Chavanas were there as well, and Lattell,
It's
talking
got
earnestly
to,
with Tom while darting
I
dark
gotta
looks
clean
at
it.
Nynaeve and the two women with her.
So I got my
By the
dab
time
pen.
Luca returned with an unstrung bow and a quiver of arrows, no one was making preparations any longer. The wagons and horses and cages, even the tethered boar horses, were abandoned. The people all clustered around Tom and the thief catcher. They followed as Luca moved away a short distance out of the camp. I am accounted a fair shot, he said, carving a white cross chest-high to himself on the trunk of a tall oak. He had his jauntiness back as he strode off 50 paces. I will take the first shot so you can see what you face. Brigitta plucked the bow from his hand and walked off another 50 as he stared after her. She shook her head over the bow, but braced it on her slippered foot and strung it in one smooth motion before Luca joined her and Elaine and Nynaeve. Brigitta pulled an arrow from the quiver he held, examined it a moment, then tossed it aside like rubbish. Luca frowned and opened his mouth, but she was already discarding a second shaft. The 3 went to the leaf-covered ground as well before she stuck one point down in the soil beside her. Of 21, she kept only 4. She can do it, Elaine whispered, trying to sound certain. Nynaeve nodded bleakly. If they had to pay out 100 gold crowns, they would soon be selling the jewelry Amathera had given them. The letters of rights were all but useless, as she had explained to Nynaeve. Their use would eventually point a finger to where they had been for Elida, if not where they were. If I had just spoken up in time, I could have stopped this. As my warder, she has to do as I say, doesn't she? From the evidence so far, obedience was no part of the bond. Had those Aes Sedai she had spied on made the men give oaths as well? Now that she thought of it, she believed one of them had. Brigitta knocked an arrow, raised the bow, and loosed seemingly without pausing to aim. Elaine winced, but the steel point struck dead center in the middle of the carved white cross. Before it stopped quivering, the second brushed in beside it. Brigitta did wait a moment then, but only for the two arrows to still. A gasp rose from the onlookers as the third shaft split the first. But that was nothing to the absolute silence, as the last split the other just as neatly. Once could have been chance. Twice. Luca looked as if his eyes were coming out of his head. Mouth hanging open, he stared at the tree, then at Brigitta, at the tree, then Brigitta. She proffered the bow, and he shook his head quickly. Suddenly he flung the quiver away, spreading his arms wide with a glad cry. Not knives! Arrows! From 100 paces! Nynaeve sagged against Elaine as the man explained what he wanted, but she made not one sound of protest. Tom and Julian were collecting money. Most handed over coins with a sigh or a laugh, but Julian had to snag Latell's arm as she tried to slip away and speak some angry words before she dug coins from her pouch. So that was what they'd been up to. She would have to speak to them firmly, but later. Nana, you don't have to go through with that. The woman only stared at Brigitta, eyes haggard. I'll wager, Brigitta said when Luca ran out of wind. He grimaced, then fished slowly into his pouch and tossed her a coin. Elaine caught the glint of gold in the sun as Brigitta examined it, and tossed it right back. That was a silver penny on your part. Luca's eyes widened in startlement, but the next moment he was laughing and pressing the gold crown into her hand. You are worth every copper of it. What do you say? Why, the Queen of Gildan herself might come to see a performance such as yours. Brigitta and her arrows, we will paint them silver, and the bow. Desperately, Elaine wanted Brigitta to look at her. They might as well put up a sign for Mogadine as do what the man suggested. But Brigitta only balanced the coin on her hand. Paint will ruin an already shabby bow, she said finally. And call me Marion. I was called that once. Leaning on the bow, she let her smile widen. Can I have the red dress, too? Elaine heaved a sigh of fervent relief. Nynaeve looked as if she were going to sick up. Chapter 37. Performances in Samara. For what seemed the 100th time, Nynaeve held a lock of her hair up to look at it and sighed. Thick murmurs of talk and laughter from hundreds, if not thousands of throats, distant music that was nearly drowned out, drifted in through the wagon walls. She had not minded spending the parade through the streets of Samara in the wagon with Elaine. Occasional peeks through the windows had convinced her that she would just as soon not be out in those packed crowds, yelling and barely making way for the wagons. But every time she looked at the brassy red of her hair,
It's because on
she
here
wished she'd
too I
been
have
doing
a
somersaults with the Chavanas rather than
layer of wax on top of the bowl too.
Carefully not looking at herself, she wrapped up completely in her plain dark gray shawl, turned, and gave a start to find Brigitta standing in the doorway. The woman had ridden in Clarine and Petra's wagon during the parade, with Clarine altering a spare red dress she'd been making for Nynaeve at Luca's direction. He had given Clarine her instructions before Nynaeve ever agreed. Brigitta wore it now, her black-dyed braid pulled over her shoulders so it nestled between her breasts, totally unconscious of the low, square neck. Just looking at her made Nynaeve fold her shawl tighter. Brigitta could not show a fingernail more of pale bosom and retain the slightest claim to decency. As it was, such a claim would be feeble, really quite laughable. Looking at
I'm
her
getting
made
there again.
Nynaeve's stomach knot
Try to
up,
give my lungs
but
no
not
time
for
to
reasons
recover.
of clothes or skin. If you are going to wear the dress, why cover up? Brigitta came inside and closed the door behind her. You are a woman. Why not be proud of it? If you think I shouldn't, Nynaeve replied hesitantly, and slowly let the shawl slide down to her elbows, revealing the twin of the other woman's garment. She felt all but naked. I thought, pressing her silk skirts hard to keep her hands on her thighs, she held her gaze on the other woman. Even knowing she wore exactly the same herself, it was easier that way. Brigitte grimaced. And if I wanted you to lower the neck another inch? Nynaeve opened her mouth, face going as scarlet as the gown, but for a moment nothing came out. When it did, she sounded as if she were being strangled. There isn't an inch to lower it. Look at your own. There isn't a tenth. 3 quick, frowning strides, and Brigitte bent slightly to put her face right in Nynaeve's. And if I said I wanted you to rid yourself of that inch, she snarled, showing teeth. What if I wanted to paint your face so Luca could have his fool? What if I stripped you out of it altogether and painted you from head to toe? A fine target you would make then. Every man inside 50 miles would come to see. Nynaeve's mouth worked, but this time no sound emerged at all. She wanted very much to close her eyes. Maybe when she opened them, none of this would be happening. With a disgusted shake of her head, Brigitte took a seat on one of the beds, one elbow on her knee and her blue eyes sharp. This must stop. When I look at you, you flinch. You run about waiting on me hand and foot. If I glance for a stool, you fetch one. If I lick my lips, you have a cup of wine in my hands before I know I am thirsty. You would wash my back and put the slippers on my feet if I let you. I am neither monster nor invalid nor child, Nynaeve. I'm only trying to make up for... She began timidly, and jumped when the other woman roared. Make up? You are trying to make me less. No, it is not that. Truly, I am to blame. You
Get a
take
slow, nice little
responsibility for
stir.
my
Gonna
actions.
take another hit.
Brigitte broke in fiercely. I chose to speak to you in Tel Aranriod. I chose to help you. I chose to track Mogadine. And I chose to take you to see her. Me! Not you, Nynaeve, me! I was not your puppet, your packhound then, and I will not be now. Nynaeve swallowed hard and gripped her skirts more tightly. She had no right to be angry with this woman. No right at all. But Brigitte had every right. You did what I asked. It is my fault that you are here. It is all my fault. Have I mentioned fault? I see none. Only men and dim-witted girls take blame where there is none, and you are neither. It was my foolish pride that made me think I could best her again, and my cowardice that let her... If I had not been so afraid I could not spit, I might have done something in time. A coward? Brigitte's eyes widened, openly incredulous, and scorn touched her voice. You? I thought you had more sense than to confuse fear with cowardice. You could have fled Tel Aranriod when Mogadine released you, but you stayed to fight. No fault or blame to you that you could not. Drawing a deep breath, she rubbed her forehead for a moment, then leaned forward intently again. Listen to me close, Nynaeve. I take no blame for what was done to you. I saw, but I could not twitch. Had Mogadine tied you into a knot or cored you like an apple, still I would take no blame. I did what I could, when I could, and you did the same. It was not the same. Nynaeve tried to take the heat out of her voice. It was my fault that you were there. My fault that you are here. If you... She stopped to swallow again. If you miss when you shoot at me today, I want you to know that I will understand. I do not miss where I aim, Brigitte said dryly, and where I aim will not be at you. She began taking things from one of the cabinets and laying them on the small table. Half-finished arrows, scraped shafts, steel arrow points, stone glue pot, fine cord, gray goose feathers for fletchings. She had said she would make her own bow, too, as soon as she could. Luca's she called a knot-riddled branch broken from a cross-grained tree by a blind idiot in the middle of the night. I liked you, Nynaeve, she said as she laid everything out. Thorns, warts, and all. I no longer do as you are now. You have no reason to like me now, Nynaeve said miserably. But the other woman spoke right over her without looking up. And I will not allow you to make me less, to make my decisions less by claiming responsibility for them. I have had few women friends, but most have had tempers like snow ghosts. I wish you could be my friend once more. What under the light was a snow ghost? From another age, no doubt. I would never try to make you less, Brigitta. I only... Brigitta paid her no mind, except to raise her voice. Her attention seemed all on her arrow shafts. I would like you again, whether you return the liking or not, but I cannot until you are yourself again. I could live with you a milk-tongued, sniveling wretch, if that was what you were. I take people as they are, not as I would like them to be, or else I leave them. But that is not what you are, and I will not accept your reasons for playing at it. So, Clarine told me of your encounter with Sarandon. Now I know what to do the next time you claim my decisions as your own. She swished a length of ashwood vigorously. I am sure Littell will be happy to provide the switch. Nynaeve forced her jaws to unclench, forced her tone as smooth as she could make it. You have a perfect right to do whatever you wish to me. Her fists in her skirts quivered more than her voice. A touch of temper showing, just at the edges. Brigitta grinned at her, at once amused and startlingly feral. How long before it bursts into flame? I'm willing to wear out any number of switches if need be. The grin faded into seriousness. I will make you see the right of this, or I will drive you away. There is no other course. I cannot, will not, leave Elaine. That bond honors me, and I will honor it and her. And I will not allow you to think that you make my decisions or made them. I am myself, not an appendage to you. Now go away. I must finish these arrows if I am to have even a few shafts that will fly true. I do not mean to kill you, and I would not have it happen by...
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this live tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.